Hey folks, welcome to my third devlog here for No Gods of Men. So today I wanted to show you how I add an animation to the game. So No Gods of Men is a totally hand-drawn game. This means thousands of hand-drawn frames like this, and I've shown a lot of videos with my drawing process, but I really haven't shown too many that are showing the full end-to-end process, which includes coding and debugging. So for today, I'm going to show that, and for this specific animation, it's going to be a pretty short couple of frames, and it's actually going to be showing the player getting hit by an enemy. So it's a fairly straightforward animation here. So what I just finished on screen was the rough sketching part of this whole thing. So in the beginning, when I'm starting an animation, I really just want to get the gestures right. Once I feel good about the overall gesture of the body, which includes things like the limbs and the spine and you know where the head is and stuff, I want to get down into the details. And so what you're seeing here is me sketching out those details, like the eyebrows, the beard, the hair, the armor, all that stuff. So I designed this main character's eyebrows to be cartoonishly big on purpose because I really wanted his expressions to be visible while in the game. Even if the game zoomed out or he's pretty far from the camera, you know, I wanted the player to be able to see what he's feeling and how he's communicating with those eyebrows. I did a similar thing with the hair and the beard too. I wanted those to have a pretty distinct shape or silhouette so that they would flow with the wind and, you know, actually have some natural movement there whenever the player is moving as well. And so here I'm just sort of finishing up that tunic and the side cape here and the waist cape. And so once I finish with this frame, I then need to go in. Oh, actually, so right here I'm changing the expression. So I made him a little bit too angry. I wanted him to feel a little bit more, you know, sad and shocked because he just got hit. And so here is the second frame of the animation. This one's more of him recuperating. So he's trying to regain his stance, get back into a combat stance. You can kind of see the motion of the beard and the mustache here. You know, his eyes are obfuscated because his head is tilted down a bit. And then obviously, like I said, you know, I wanted those spiky, those two major spikes in the hair, primarily from a design perspective so that they can flow with animations like this. So, you know, in this particular animation, in this frame, they're kind of flowing upward as his head's tilting downward. And then here I'm just sort of changing his torso to be a little bit more pointed toward the player. Okay, so I've finished the actual sketching part of this, and now I'm moving into inking. So I'm using a round marker brush here from Clip Studio Paint. And I mentioned this before, but I kind of go back and forth between Clip Studio, Photoshop, and Illustrator. When it comes to drawing more organic flowing animations like this one, I like the timeline UI a bit better here in Clip Studio. It just feels a little bit simpler. But I use Illustrator a whole lot for things like user interfaces, buttons, menus. And I'll use Photoshop for you know, a lot of matte paintings, things like backgrounds, things that are not animated, where I just want to have a large canvas to paint on. And so just to back up here, you know, just to give a little bit more story behind this character, he's a fallen acolyte. And so in his world, there were many gods. The people worshipped these gods and built a towering citadel to be closer to them, almost like a Tower of Babel in ways, although slightly different in motivation for why they built it. And so these gods had acolytes, and acolytes were warriors that were meant to keep the peace and maintain control among their disciples. And so this character's clothing is a pretty standard part of a traditional acolyte's wardrobe. It's a lot of red and gold cloths, along with armor around his chest and his stomach. And so as part of their initiation, acolytes are infused with blood from the gods. And so this blood grants them remarkable abilities. And so for the player character here, he's able to manifest these abilities as flames and manipulate fire. And so that's why the flames are here. I actually haven't gotten to them just yet, but they're, you know, going to be engulfing his hands here as he's being hit by an enemy. They kind of wax and wane based on his emotions, and he's capable of manipulating them, you know, for battle as well as for non-battle things like lighting sconces in the citadel and whatnot. And so the player character here, like I said, is a fallen acolyte, though. So something mysterious happened to him prior to the events leading up to the game that caused him to defect. And you'll learn more in the game, but broadly speaking, he's a seasoned warrior with a pretty bruised and battered soul. So he has a very little love for the gods he once served, and you'll kind of find out why as you continue playing the game. And so here I'm just sort of finishing up, I'm wrapping up the animation, adding some rendering and some shadows to give it some depth, making sure that I've got the right motion here, and also making sure I've got all the right colors. And from here, you can kind of see my reference up in the left-hand corner. That's the character reference that I have from his idle animation, just to make sure that all the colors are consistent. And even the drawing itself of him is consistent. Okay, so yeah, here I'm actually just adding a bit of a highlight so that it's obvious to the player that something happened, because this animation is going to fly by pretty quickly once you're hit, and then I export it to my overly complex folder system here. I've got a lot of folders here. The hierarchy's pretty poorly managed, I admit. And so now I'm importing that animation into GameMaker Studio. And so I'm adding it in as a sprite, and I'm trying to give a first stab at what I think the frames per second should be. I want it to be snappy, of course, but I also don't want it to be so quick that the player doesn't really notice it. The point of this animation really is for the player to recognize that they've been hit, that there's some damage happening. Without this animation, the player may not understand that, they've been hit, because the character might just be continuing whatever animation they were doing before. So this interrupts that animation and makes it clear to the player that they've been hit. And so now I'm looking through the code and trying to find the area where I have all of the logic for the player getting hit and the damage and whatnot. And fortunately, I actually have a lot of comments in this code, so I think my professors in university might be happy to hear that. I think they definitely instilled that in me many years ago when I was back in college. And so in this particular instance, it's super helpful because I can easily snap to where the damage logic is. And so my first real thing to do here is to find where in this code I'm implementing the damage being taken. And before that damage is taken, I want to change the sprite of the player to this hit animation. Now, after I do that, the most important thing is to make sure that I'm able to terminate that animation. So if I just leave it as it is right now, that hit animation is just going to loop forever. So once you get hit, it'll loop, 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 and it'll never change from that sprite. And so what I want to do is before it even gets into that assignment of the sprite, I want to first check, is the player currently in that animation? And if they are in that animation, check whether or not the index of the image, so you can kind of think of these animations as an array of images. And so if the index is the last index in the array, then break out of that animation and go back to the idle animation, which is kind of the default animation for the player. And so once I've got that conditional in there, we're pretty much good to go. So we can test this animation in the game itself. So here is the test. Great. Yeah, it looks like it's working. There's no bugs, surprisingly, to be honest with you. And yeah, so it works. I think my biggest concern, though, is that it's a little snappy, a little too fast. So I'm going to change it really quickly to be a little bit slower. And I'm retesting it here just to wrap it up. Great. Now collected some stone. And the enemy's coming. He's hitting. And great. There we go. It's a little bit slower. It's noticeable for the player. It accomplishes the goal of the animation. All right, so that was a pretty straightforward animation, and that's it for the devlog. Thanks a lot for watching. Make sure to wishlist No Gods of Men on Steam, and subscribe to the channel if you really want to keep up with the development.